Let's start with a very interesting pro-revenge story from Bama Fan 4. Jesus. Newly hired youth minister got me kicked out of church for no reason. I found out he had been screwing a deacon's wife, and I helped the deacon ruin his life. TLDR. Church youth minister spread false rumors about me and got me kicked out of the church I had attended my whole life for no reason other than pure meanness. I found a guy who hated him even more than I did, and I gave the guy information that he used to do a very artful and thorough job of completely ruining the youth minister's life. He got fired and blacklisted, couldn't find another job. By chance, I saw him several years later working a shitty job. Sweet. About 6 to 7 years ago, I was a ministerial student at a conservative Christian college. I had attended the same Bible-believing church since I was a small child. It was large, about 1,000 members, but not a megachurch. This church had been an enormous part of my life for as long as I could remember. I played piano for youth choir, preached at the children's church service, which was held in the church's chapel at the same time as the adult service, drove the church bus to pick up unchurched children, etc., and ad infinitum. I did all of this for free, not even getting reimbursed for expenses. During my senior year in college, we got a new Minister of Music, Education and Youth. This guy was as charming as an ice cream sundae with razor blades in it. I'll call him Mr. Charming. All of the deacons and their wives thought he walked on water. He was an authoritarian asshole. In his first meeting with the church youth group, he announced that he had been hired to straighten out the youth group. One of his favorite sayings was, "When I tell my disciples jump, the only questions they get to ask are how high and how far." The adults loved him, and the youth hated him. Within a few weeks, half of the high school and college students, i.e., all of those without parents in the church, had quit coming to church. Most youth directors would have gotten into trouble over this, but he had the audacity to proclaim, in front of the entire congregation in the Sunday morning worship service, that he had eliminated all of the thorny ground from the youth group, a reference to the parable of the sower in the Bible. And the pastor and all of the deacons loved him for it. He didn't waste any time going after what he really wanted, the pastor's job. The pastor, whom I'll call Pastor T, was about 60 years old. Within a few weeks of Mr. Charming's arrival, rumours started circulating about Pastor T's health. He was an avid runner and cyclist, and that he just didn't seem to be as mentally sharp as he used to be. He frequently quoted long Bible passages from the pulpit, entirely from memory without misstating a single word, sometimes in Greek or Hebrew. Worst of all, however, was the accusation that he was really too liberal for the church. In my denomination, it is the kiss of death to even be suspected of being a liberal. None of these accusations made any sense, but people kept talking about them. I have no idea why the pastor didn't find out. Or maybe he did find out and was just too scared to do anything about it. In some denominations, like Catholic or Methodist, the denomination assigns pastors priests. Not my church's denomination. Each church calls the minister. This guarantees that every pastor always walks a razor's edge. The slightest slip and you're out. You don't even have to slip. Maybe you even do the right thing and it still offends enough people. It doesn't take many, just a handful if they hate you enough. Then you're out. Or maybe, like Pastor T, some creep just lies about you and gets your job. And since the church often owns your house, the parsonage or manse, your entire family is suddenly homeless and destitute. Then I became a target. I still don't know why. A couple of months after starting to work for my church, Mr. Charming called me and informed me that my services were no longer needed at youth choir, children's church, bus ministry, anywhere. In fact, he said, he did not even want me to participate in any of these functions at all, not even go to the Sunday morning worship service. I later found out that members of his family had been hired by the church at very nice rates of pay to perform these functions that I'd been doing for free. His wife got paid more for playing a beat-up piano at the 1-hour youth choir rehearsal than the main organist pianist got paid for playing for adult choir rehearsal plus Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings, when the youth choir sang. The wife could barely pick out the notes on a piano. This lady radiated bitterness, resentment, and repressed anger, but she rarely said anything. She just sat there and glared, which was somehow even creepier than when she spoke. I was very hurt, emotionally, so I dropped by Pastor T's office and tearfully asked him what I'd done wrong. I couldn't get a straight answer, except he told me that people are saying things about me, and that if I wanted to get a good recommendation from him to our denomination's ministers' school, I'd better shut up and do what you're told. So, I started asking all of my church friends what people were saying about me. Everyone said, "Well, I didn't want to tell you, and I don't believe it, but here's what I heard." According to the rumor mill, I had gotten my girlfriend pregnant and forced her to have an abortion. I hadn't even had a girlfriend since junior high, and I'd been arrested for possession of marijuana, and my dad had had to pay a bunch of money to hush it up. I didn't even know what pot looked like. There were other rumors, but you get the idea. I did what Pastor T told me to. I never darkened the door of that church again, except once, months later, see below. It hurt like hell. I'd devoted my life to that church since I was a little kid. But I had to have Pastor T's recommendation to get into the minister's school I wanted to go to, and the pain was unbearable just driving by there. So I decided to keep my distance. But I started thinking about Mr. Charming. Anyone who was that evil had to have a past, and it probably wasn't a good one. I knew that just before working for my church, he had worked at a large church in the same denomination in a small town about 50 miles away. That church was actually about twice the size of my church. So he had moved from a big church to the same job at a smaller church. A bad career move? Running away from something? Ah, there was something rotten in Denmark, and it smelled like an opportunity for me. As luck would have it, one of my uncles and his family lived in that same small town, although none of my family attended Mr. Charming's former church. So I called one of my cousins, told her my story, and enlisted her as a co-conspirator. I'll call her Anne. The next Sunday morning, Anne and I attended Sunday school and morning worship at Mr. Charming's old church. Although Anne had never been a member of that church, it was a small town where everyone knew everyone, so she knew most of the people there. She started asking about Mr. Charming and got an earful. Every one of her friends said that Mr. Charming was a world-class creep. He would flirt with and even make suggestive comments to all of the girls in the youth group, even those in junior high. He was 40+ years old and had a wife and 3 children of his own. And then there was the touching. Never anything obvious or illegal, but he loved to put his hands all over the young ladies whenever their parents weren't around. But, just like at my former church, the adults loved him because he kept the youth in line. Our investigation went on for several weeks. I kept a low profile so as not to arouse suspicion. Mostly, I just stood around, ate donuts, drank coffee, and talked about football. Anne did most of the work because she knew so many people, and it was perfectly natural for her to attend this church in her hometown, even if it was not the church she usually attended. After church was over, we would go to her house, have a delicious Sunday lunch cooked by my aunt, and then write down everything we had learned. By then, Anne's whole family were in on my investigation. They were as angry as I was about the way I'd been treated, and our weekly report made interesting lunchtime conversation. Within a few weeks, I was sure that all I had to do was drive a few of these young ladies and their parents, friends of my aunt and uncle, down to my old church, let them tell their stories to the parents of a few girls in the youth group, and Mr. Charming would become Mr. Unemployed. But it kept getting better and better, so Anne and I kept digging. And I really wanted to keep a low profile if I could, because I didn't want to piss off Pastor T any more than I had to. He knew a lot of people in the denomination, and he could easily ruin my ministerial career before it even started. Finally, after a month or so, Anne grabbed me by the sleeve and said, "You've got to hear this." She introduced me to a well-dressed, very large guy, maybe 30, 35 years old. I'll call him Fred. we slipped off into a Sunday school room where we would not be overheard. It turned out that Mr. Charming had had a multi-year affair with Fred's wife. Fred had kept his cool when he found out, talked with a lawyer, and had spent months gathering evidence. Text messages, voicemails, emails, even photos and videos with Fred's wife, and Mr. Charming in them. Apparently, Mr. Charming got stimulated by watching videos of himself doing the wild thing with Fred's wife. Then Mr. Charming would send the videos to Fred's wife, and they both would have cybersex while texting each other. Later, they would hook up the old-fashioned way and make more videos. Finally, Fred confronted his wife. She denied everything, but the evidence was just too much. Fred told her he wanted a divorce, full custody of the children, their house, his retirement money, his business, her engagement and wedding rings, everything, even the dog. She hired a lawyer, but laws and courts being what they are in this rural Bible Belt county, her lawyer told her that if the judge saw the videos, she'd be lucky if she ended up in a homeless shelter with all of her worldly possessions under her bunk in a garbage sack. Then Fred turned his attention to Mr. Charming. Fred still sincerely loved his wife, and he was convinced that Mr. Charming had deliberately ruined his marriage. Taking Mr. Charming to court, suing him for loss of consortium and otherwise making him legally miserable would take too long. This is the rural Deep South. Many people around here prefer a more direct approach. In rural counties, the police and any jury of your peers will probably include people who have known you since kindergarten. So, if you have a good reason for your actions and you aren't too stupid about it, there are things that you can do. Fred scheduled an appointment with Mr. Charming in his church office, who did not suspect a thing because Fred was a deacon, and his children were in the church youth group. Remember that I said Fred was big? 6 foot 6 inches at least, 300 pounds. And if there was an inch of fat on him, he hid it well. Looked like he could pull up a 100-foot oak tree by the roots without breaking a sweat. Fred told me that he brought several friends with him, and of course, the videos. One friend blocked the door. Another unplugged the phone. A third one stood behind Mr. Charming and encouraged him to stay seated in his chair. Fred made Mr. Charming watch about 10 minutes of one of the videos. Then calmly said, "I'm going to stand here and watch you pack up your stuff. Then you're going to walk out of this building and never show your f***ing ass in this town again. Or we'll be back." Mr. Charming did as he was told. A month later, he had a new job at another church, my old church, and started ruining another whole set of lives, including mine. Fred actually did not know where Mr. Charming had gone. He had been led to believe that Mr. Charming had moved out of state. He was surprised, gratified, and angered to learn that this scumbag was only 50 miles away. This had all happened just a few months before. Fred was still deeply in love with his wife. They were getting counseling, and he hoped that they could save his marriage. But his hatred of Mr. Charming was still fulminating. Like Mount St. Helens a few minutes before the explosion. He presented such a face of restrained rage and vindictiveness that it scared me, and I wasn't even the one he was mad at. The next day, Monday, I drove back up there and gave him a copy of the directory of my old church. It had home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses for pretty much every member of the church. I showed him the pages that listed all of the deacons and other church leaders, and I marked some of the church's major financial donors. I explained my situation with Pastor T and asked that my name not be mentioned. "No problem," he said. The next Sunday, I could not resist visiting my old church to see how things were going. Mr. Charming was nowhere to be seen, nor was any explanation given about what had happened to him. One weird thing, though, the pastor looked scared shitless. His voice, usually resonant, loud and almost musically baritone, trembled during the whole sermon. I slipped in just before the service started and made a point of sitting in the very front row, center pew. The look on his face when he saw me was worth all of my trouble. I didn't know it at the time, but Fred had gotten right to work and done a very thorough job. The whole church had gotten multiple anonymous emails with photos and videos of Mr. Charming and Fred's wife in various, compromising positions and stages of undress. Deacons and major donors got emails plus express mail packages just for good measure. Mr. Charming and Pastor T had been left out. They didn't know anything until the phone calls started pouring in. After the worship service, it did not take long for my church friends to figure out why I was there. It was very gratifying. I was something of a hero, although I kept swearing that I had no idea what they were talking about. Things continued to blow up in my former church for months afterwards. Both Pastor T and the pastor of Mr. Charming's old church almost lost their jobs because they had lied to my old church's committee of deacons, who had recommended hiring Mr. Charming, about why Mr. Charming had left his old job. But somehow they managed to stay in the pulpits at their churches, although a lot of church members left my former church, which caused some financial problems. There was talk of legal action for sending unsolicited porn to little old ladies and other people in the church. But nobody ever was able to prove that Fred did it. I don't think they tried very hard. After all, his wife was in the videos and photos. Both churches really did not want this to become a court case because of Mr. Charming's trysts, and the fact that he had spent years screwing a deacon's wife while he had unlimited, unsupervised access to dozens of church youth would then become a matter of public record. So they hushed it up. I never saw Pastor T again. I had lost all of the trust and respect that I had had for him, and I was sure that he had figured out that I was somehow connected to the whole fiasco. So my chances of having a preaching career in my denomination were precisely zero. By that time, being a pastor, like Pastor T, was the last thing I wanted anyway. I withdrew my application to minister's school and eventually completed a doctorate in archaeology at a different grad school, magna cum laude. I've been teaching at a large public university in the Midwest of the USA, with summer gigs on archaeological digs in Europe. And I am very happy. One last, very gratifying event. The reason for this post. All that happened 6 to 7 years ago. Fast forward to last March. I went to pick up a friend at a large downtown urban bus station in the US. Everyone hates this place. Not only is it crowded, it is poorly maintained and filthy. It smells like spoiled garbage mixed with diesel exhaust and seldom cleaned public restrooms. My friend's bus was late. I stopped by the newsstand to get myself a soda and candy bar. Who do you think was restocking the shelves? Mr. Charming. I just sat across from the newsstand and enjoyed my drink and snack. He recognized me, then turned away. I just sat and watched him, restocking shelves full of porno mags and junk food. Revenge is a feast that is best enjoyed cold. Wow. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. OP strategically take down the youth minister and brought him to the streets, exposing his true nature. It is a reminder that deceit will ultimately lead to downfall. It is satisfying to the young minister doing a menial job. Truly satisfying. The next story is from Reckonite. Look at this giant hole you dug for yourself. Now watch as I bury you in it. Hello Reddit, long-time lurker and commentor, first-time posting. This occurred back in the late 90s in Australia, so Aussie terms will be used. Please do not share, use this in your YouTube or other social media platforms without my explicit permission first. Names will be changed to protect those involved. This is a very long one, so the TLDR is at the bottom. I was in my third and final year at uni, studying archaeology. Due to recurring and severe illness in the second semester of my second year, I had been unable to complete several core subjects and had to repeat them. This included an archaeological field school held in the mid-year holidays, where you would implement the techniques you had already learned. This field school was compulsory if you wished to enroll in a particular subject, but not everyone studying was headed in that direction. I had successfully completed the previous year's field school, but due to my illness, was unable to complete the associated course, so had to retake them both again. This university has a number of campuses dotted around the country and some overseas. The field school is offered to students on 2 campuses, the main campus, located north of Capricorn, and one of its offshoots, located even further north of Capricorn. The field schools are held in the area of the main campus, so those participating are required to travel to attend. For some, it's across town. For others, it's several hours in a car. Needless to say, those attending from the sister campus do not do so lightly or cheaply. My lecturer, whom we shall call Matt, was a bloody legend. He was a brilliant lecturer, has authored 2 books, and is still working in his field, albeit at a different university than the one in this story. He knew his was easygoing, friendly, would sit and share a jug of beer with you on a Friday avro. And I only ever saw him angry once. This is important for later. Also note that grading went as follows, in descending order: HD, pass with high distinction, 85, 100%. D, pass with distinction, 75, 84%. C, pass with credit, 65, 74%. P, pass, 50, 64%. PC, pass conceded, 48, 49%. N, fail, 50%. The event. Matt and his counterpart at the sister campus had been granted permission to conduct this particular year's field school in a gully adjacent to an historic and protected, listed cemetery. This gully actually split the cemetery in 2 and was used basically as a garbage maiden. Due to the nature of the gully, there was only space permitted for a specified number of dig sites. Groups were to be allocated a site once they arrived on the first day, after they had decided on their members. As I was living on campus and had no car, I knew I'd be unable to arrive at the field school at the specified beginning times. I'd be half an hour late on the Friday and Monday mornings, and a full hour late on the weekend. I'd spoken to Matt about this, and as we knew each other quite well, and had shared jugs of beer quite often, he agreed that I would not be penalised for arriving late, but that I'd most likely be allocated a group to make up numbers rather than choose my own. It couldn't be helped, so I agreed. This is also important for later. Friday rolls around. I arrive at the site a half hour late, all good, and I'm introduced to my group. There are 4 of us, myself, the only female in the group, but experienced in how the field school is run due to my previous year. Gaza, an older, grizzled male geology student who was taking the course just as a matter of interest. Baza, a young male geology student who, by all other indications, was heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. And Daza, another young male geology student, good friends with Baza, also heading towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. All 3 of my counterparts were from the sister campus, so had travelled at some expense to attend. They'd already been allocated a dig site, and when introduced, Matt tells them I've got field school experience, so to utilise my knowledge. Badza and Daza smile and nod, giving me a friendly wave. Gaza grunts, but a little later, while surveying our area, we get to chatting. He's a nice enough bloke, just a bit miffed he's been put in a group with a bunch of young shits, and was worried he'd be carrying us or keeping us in line. Nah, mate, I'm here to get shit done, get the data I'll need for next semester, and hopefully enjoy myself as much as I had the previous year. Now, let me tell you, Lara Croft and Indiana Jones have royally the perception of the greater public when it comes to archaeology. No, Jurassic Park doesn't count, as they're paleontologists dealing with animal remains. Archaeologists deal with human remains. A lot of what happens on an archaeological dig is repetitive and monotonous. You survey your area using surveying equipment, sketch and take photos of your allocated site before measuring out your 1 metre by 1 metre dig pit. You take more pictures, chalked sketches of the as-yet untouched pit, as well as taking an initial soil sample. You scrape off a spit of earth. This is a layer of a predetermined depth, in this case 5 centimetres, and once done, you test the pH levels of the soil you've removed, documenting everything that you've scraped up. Yep, more photos and sketches. Before taking more photos, show sketches of the pit, and anything that may be lodged in there before scraping off another spit. If you hit an object, you remove the soil from around it, but don't actually remove the object until you are removing the layer of soil from beneath it. It must remain in situ to preserve the data. Boring, I know, but is also very important for later. Also important to note is soil composition in relation to how deep you can safely dig your pit before extending the boundaries to prevent soil contamination or the walls collapsing. Our dig site had quite loose, sandy soil, so it was announced that every 50 centimetres down, we would have to extend the sides of the pit by 50 centimetres on each side. It wasn't anticipated that we'd get much beyond 1 metre down, definitely not further than 1.5 metres, so we'd only need to expand once, possibly twice. This was how they had divvied up the entire site to fit us all in. It became very clear very quickly that neither Bazza or Dazza had anticipated how monotonous the next 4 days were going to be. Both Gaza and I had to repeatedly call them over to assist us with surveying, and when it came to the soil scraping, they were excited at first, but then became bored as we had to yet again record every minute detail. As I was the only one who had thought to bring my camera along, one that required actual film, as this was before inexpensive digital cameras, smartphones were at least 10 years away, and I was a Pivot Uni student. I was the one responsible for taking photos. This included candid shots of the entire field school, other groups, the lecturers, and our dig site. Day 1 of the field school ends, and we all head back to wherever for the night to kick back, relax, and prepare for another day of toil. The next morning, Saturday, I arrive at the field school 1 hour late, so at 10 a.m., as per the bus schedule. Seeing as how I'd already had this okayed by Matt, I'm not anticipating any issue with my tardiness. I get to the cemetery and seeing Matt, give him a cheery, "Morning, Matt, all good, yeah?" Matt turns and glowers at me. I mean, if looks could kill, I'd be right at home in that cemetery with all the other dead people. You know how I mentioned earlier how easygoing and laid-back Matt is, and I've only ever seen him angry once? Well, this was that time. Matt was pacing, teeth grinding, fists clenched. He was pissed. "Just get to your group and get to work." Matt practically snarled at me. I'm worried now that he's angry with me for being late, even though we'd previously squared it. I'm nervous and worried because we'd had a really good rapport in the past, and now I'm thinking that I've done something that's going to make my last semester at uni hell on earth. Have I done something wrong? I know I was late, but like I told you before the field school, this was the first bus I could get out here. I'm really sorry if that's a problem. Matt sighs and shook his head. "No, Reckonite, it's not you. You've done nothing wrong. I just can't deal with it right now, so just go to your dig site and get on with it. I'll talk to you later." I head to my dig site, and what I find there almost has me in tears. When we'd packed up the previous day, our pit was 1 metre by 1 metre square with a depth of 30 centimetres. I now stand before a 1 metre by 1 metre hole in the ground, dug down to a depth of approximately 3 metres. There are mounds of sandy dirt surrounding our pit, and I can see a multitude of objects that have been excavated just sitting there. Other groups are staring at us, but trying to look as though they aren't staring. Nobody will speak to us either. Gaza is livid. The dude is almost apoplectic. Bazza and Gaza are both looking very pale, and like they want to puke. I'm all, what the ever-loving f*** happened here? Who the f*** did this? It turns out that after everyone had left the site on the Friday night, Bazza and Dazza and another mate of theirs in another group, we'll call him Keza, got together and got on the piss. It was during this that they decided to continue digging our pit, so they broke into the cemetery with a shovel and proceeded to dig down until one of them passed out shit-faced at the bottom of a 1 metre by 1 metre hole in loose, sandy soil. The fact that the dude managed to wake up and make it out of the hole without the entire thing collapsing in on him is a miracle in itself. Matt had been called out to the site at 3 a.m. by the police, who had been called because one of the residents in the area saw something dodgy going on. Needless to say, Bazza, Dazza, and Keza were all up shit creek in a barbed wire canoe with a rusty teaspoon for a paddle. They couldn't leave until they'd sobered up, but had been told that, in no uncertain terms, after the field school finished that day, they were to pack up and off. Matt and his counterpart would deal with booting them from the archaeological program on the Tuesday. after the field school ended. This left Gaza and I in a few-bar situation. Luckily for him, Gaza was able to join the group that Keza had been part of, especially since the group were all from the sister campus. I, on the other hand, was left hanging like an unwanted tampon string out of the gusset of a bikini. There were no other groups that could take me, and besides, something had to be done about the cluster that was my dig site. So, Saturday ended up with me trying to document whatever I could, and to keep Bazza and Dazza out of my hair, I gave them my camera and told them to take photographic documentation of every single piece of evidence that they had dug up. They had to use the scale measurement and a title board that was supposed to identify the item by date, location, spit level, etc. So off they went with a miniature whiteboard, whiteboard marker, scale measurement, and my camera. This kept them occupied for most of the day, as there were in excess of 200 items that they'd unearthed in their drunken dig for buried whatever the they were looking for. I ended up filling in that hole wishing with every shovelful of soil that Baza and Dazza were still passed out drunk at the bottom, but such is life. Matt ended up tacking me onto another group in an observational role, as the members of that group were all from my campus and would be in the same second semester class as me. The revenge? Now, as I previously mentioned, the field school was linked to another class held during the second semester. This class essentially took all of the data and evidence that had been unearthed during the field school, and you examined, tested, collated, and then submitted a report based on those findings as your final assessment piece. Seeing as how I only had 1 day's worth of actual data and evidence, I could not submit the field school report as required. As this was a core class, and I didn't want to have to retake it for a third year, I approached Matt to talk about how we could rectify this into a situation where I would be able to pass and continue with my studies. After some discussion, Matt agreed to allow me to do a field school critique, using what had happened to me as essentially a how-to on how not to participate in a field school. I had the data from the first day to use in the class, and then the photos and sketches taken by myself and the Dodgy brothers, Bazza and Dazza, of the objects we'd excavated. After developing the film of the field school, I noticed some interesting things. The candid photos I took on the Friday included shots of Bazza and Dazza not only behaving inappropriately, but interfering with the equipment we were using and therefore possibly contaminating the data we had legitimately acquired. They were also shown to be in areas that we weren't allowed to be in, touching things that didn't belong to them, and also damaging ornaments left on some of the historic graves closest to the dig site. Then there were the photos that they had taken on the Saturday. They had apparently decided that, because I wasn't overjoyed by the fact that they'd completely screwed me over by digging that hole, they'd make the only photographs of the artifacts they'd unearthed unusable by writing inappropriate comments and cursing slurs towards me on the title board. One of the ones that has stuck in my head was a large clay ceramic clam decoration, on which they'd written, "Oh, I do love a day beside the seaside," with a hairy clam. This was the only photo of the clam that had been taken. When we filled the pits back in, we had to re-enter the artifacts, so I couldn't just take a new picture. Also, over 200 pieces had been unearthed, remember? And Matt had told me to use everything I'd gathered to write my report. So I used every single photo, including the ones that said I was a cunt, not in the friendly way most Aussies use the term, and that alluded to wishing sexual violence on me. At the end of the semester, I submitted my report, knowing full well that the best I could hope for was a pass, but that was enough to get me through to my final year. The fallout. I found this out from Matt at the beginning of my final year at uni. So, it turns out that when Matt had booted the Dodgy brothers from the archaeological program, they had been allowed to continue on with their degree studying geology, but that they were not allowed to have anything to do with archaeology and were on very thin ice. When I submitted my report and Matt saw the extent of what they had done, kindly documented by themselves on the most part, and just how badly they had screwed me over. Gaza was fine, as the group he'd been moved to had all the appropriate data and had been able to submit a proper field report, He went ballistic. He called a meeting with the deans from both campuses, the Department of Tropical Environments and Societies, Geology Department, and the Department of Anthropology, Archaeology and Society, Archaeology Department, for both campuses. He presented to them my field report, told them about how he'd been teaching me for the past 3 years, and had it not been for the illness affecting me during my second year, how I would have likely completed my degree at this point. He also spoke about my previous field school, my behaviour, and had I not been forced to withdraw due to my health, and based on previous work I'd submitted, I would have likely received a D or HD on my work. The fact that I averaged C and D during the time I was ill showed my academic prowess. The fact that the only grade he was able to give me for the report he currently had in his possession was a PC was a blow to my academic record. That was wholly undeserved. He said a lot of other things, but the end result was that Bazza and Dazza were not only expelled from the archaeological program, they were now booted from the geological one as well. Furthermore, they were expelled and blacklisted from the university itself, which meant they could never re-enroll, and any other universities they applied to would be able to see this and the reasons why. Essentially, they were blocked from being able to obtain any university degree in that area, and to enroll in any university for a different career. They would have to wade through oceans of bureaucratic red tape and jump through so many hoops they'd make the Duracell bunny jealous. Unfortunately, this experience soured me on archaeology as a career path. Luckily for me, I was able to pick up a couple of extra courses in history and English, that I graduated with a BA with a major in English literature and a minor in history and archaeology. I went back to uni after a gap year and obtained my grad, DIP, in secondary education. TL, DR. Immature twats decide to screw over my entire second semester course load during a group project by getting shit-faced and contaminating evidence and data needed. I write a final report on what they did, with evidence, which results in them getting kicked out of uni and blacklisted, screwing up their career prospects. ETA, including all social media platforms in regards to sharing. Also fixed some spacing. The revenge was really satisfying. Bazza and Dazza got what the bitter consequences of their actions. The blow was really satisfying when they get expelled and blacklisted from the university. It was really a brutal and career-destroying revenge. Bye-bye for now. Let's see you tomorrow.